Give me a good comeback against MAGA who claimed that tariffs would force production back to the US. Okay. I don't need to give you a comeback, I can just give you facts. Back in 2018, the Trump administration actually issued 25% tariffs on steel and 10% tariffs on aluminum coming from Canada and a few other countries. Because in this case, the tariff was used as an economic sanction, a very interesting chain of events unfolded from that one decision. Firstly, the United States steel prices skyrocketed, which evidently means an increase in cost for manufacturers. Now here, a very interesting question comes into place. You can ask, Narcy, I thought there was abundant iron ore in the United States, especially in regions like Minnesota, which is true. However, the United States lacks the modern infrastructure to turn that iron ore into steel. So in this case, even though we have the resource, we don't have the infrastructure, and building that infrastructure would take years. Whereas in present time, countries like China already have a hyper-modernized version of that infrastructure, can produce steel at a very cheap cost. Now, as a result of all this, most notably Harley-Davidson, instead of increasing domestic production, chose to move their manufacturing overseas. And they did this for a variety of reasons. The retaliatory tariffs that came from the European Union actually increased the price per bike exported from the United States by $2,200. Now remember that Europe is Harley-Davidson's second largest market. So by moving production overseas, Harley-Davidson very smartly cut down a lot of their costs that wouldn't be there to begin with had it not been for Trump's administration's tariffs. I need you to understand the issue is not the tariff per se, but the fact that you're weaponizing the tariff to apply economic pressure. And more often than not, there's some sort of retaliation from the country that you're applying the tariff to. This is a very loud and very real example of how tariffs can backfire and have backfired in the past. Because if I have a private company in the United States, I already have higher costs manufacturing things than if I were manufacturing those things in Thailand, which is where Harley-Davidson ended up moving manufacturing to. And at the same time now, I just fired a bunch of American workers. I don't have to pay high salaries anymore. So what incentive do I have as Harley-Davidson to ever come back and return my manufacturing back to the United States? So yes, a bunch of people got fired as a consequence of moving manufacturing away from the United States, which wouldn't have happened to begin with if it weren't for these tariffs. And because tariffs are an economic sanction, Canada retaliated with their own tariffs on American goods like pork and whiskey, which ultimately negatively impacted American farmers and businesses. So this is one of the many case studies that you can use to prove your point. To conclude, I want to discourage you from making the mistake that MAGA does. Don't use overtly exaggerated statements, because if the question is, will tariffs on all goods force production of all of those goods back into the United States? Absolutely not. That is a ridiculous statement. But if the question is there a chance in the future with the right infrastructure that some of these goods could be once again be manufactured in the United States? Then the answer is maybe. But for that, we don't need tariffs. We need subsidies and government programs that will subsidize these initiatives. But that's a discussion for another time. So be targeted, specific, and knowledgeable. And let me know if you want more case studies. I have a shit ton of them.